On today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast, burning questions for the Los Angeles Kings, Minnesota Wild, and Nashville Predators, including, is this the end of the line for Kings general manager Rob Blake?
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome in to another episode of Locked On NHL. We are your daily NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube and tune in on your favorite audio platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On NHL is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On NHL, we take a look at the burning questions for the Los Angeles Kings, the Minnesota Wild, and the Nashville Predators ahead of training camp and the start of the 2024-2025 season. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild, and joined here on the Western Conference Tuesday edition of Locked On NHL by the big shark himself, JD Young of Locked On Sharks. And JD continuing to roll through burning questions. These are the things that keep the fans of these teams up at night as we get closer to the start of the 2024-2025 season. And let's start with a team that, honestly, it's starting to feel like it's do or die time for the Los Angeles Kings. And so we get it started simply by asking that question, like, is this it for this iteration of the Los Angeles Kings?
Yeah, Rob Blake, the GM, it feels very much like you gotta poop or get off the pot here for him, because this is a team that has gone to the playoffs the last couple seasons, which is great, right? A lot of franchises would love to be going to the playoffs, but they just keep getting knocked out in the first round. Yes, I know it's mostly to Edmonton, and that's kind of stinks when Edmonton's that good, but this roster's very much kind of locked into what they are and who they are with some of the contracts that they've either signed, or the guys that they've signed after trading for, or some of the guys that they've acquired recently. And this team just kind of feels like it is stuck in third gear and cannot kind of start to get over the hump, right? And especially in a Pacific Division, that feels like it's going to be changing over the next couple of seasons, with some of the teams going to be coming up and some of the teams potentially starting to hit rebuilds. But I don't really see a path forward for this team unless a guy like Quentin Byfield maybe makes that superstar leap and just becomes the best player on the team, which is very, very possible. But it just feels very much like this team is locked in to be a wild card team. They're going to go to the playoffs, and they're going to lose probably in 6 games in the first round.
Yeah, and it is just simply not getting enough from the guys that you need to be getting more from. I mean, you just look up and down at what the Kings got in the postseason. I mean, a guy that Minnesota Wild fans know well, Kevin Fiala, had 2 points in the 5 games that the Kings played this past postseason. 1 goal, 1 assist. You need more from a guy like that. I mean, Anze Kopitar had 3 points, just 1 goal, but other than Adrian Kempe, who had 4 goals in the 5 games, nobody really went nuts. And it feels like this Kings team just needs somebody to really go above and beyond to be able to get them to where they want to go. And that's not even talking about the goaltending situation this past season, in which you had Cam Talbot, who looked like a Vezina Trophy favorite at the beginning of the year. He really tailed off. But that's kind of the price you pay as the Kings when you have all this money thrown in to the guys that they do in the lineup. I mean, Kevin Fiala making $7.87 million per season, Anze Kopitar making $7. Quentin Byfield's new extension has him making 6.25. Philip
No, which I
Deneau.
love that extension. Like I
Oh
think
yeah.
Byfield is that's going to age very nicely, I think, for the Kings. But for him, like I think he kind of had his breakout season. We'll see if he can kind of make the next level here. It's just that they're paying all these guys kind of in that like middle class range, and you're getting middle class production out of these guys. And I think that's in the playoffs, right? You have that's where you need these guys to kind of take that step up, and nobody's really done that. And the goaltending situation, right? They were very cheap the past couple seasons. They went out and they get Darcy Kemper as they kind of dump off a problem child of theirs. And like, is Darcy Kemper gonna maybe? It just feels like there's questions there, and there's not a lot of answers to questions. I think.
Well, and it's interesting too because think about how much movement there was on the goalie front this offseason. And you have essentially a clean slate if you're the Los Angeles Kings. And you come out of all of that, and look, Darcy Kemper is he's probably at or slightly below league average at this point in his career. But it feels like you need somebody that can go into a postseason series and win it for you. Like you need somebody that knows what that takes and is able to step up in that spot. And they just, I don't know if Darcy Kemper can be that guy at this point in his career. And so I think that's the thing that really surprises me the most about this Kings team is it felt like you knew that was a spot you needed to majorly upgrade. And whether it be that you just didn't want to pay the price tag that some of these other goalies were going for, like Jacob Markstrom, some of the others, like either you didn't want to pay the price or you just didn't really get involved. And I don't know which one is worse because you're in like a win now mode. And so if you're in a win now mode, you should be looking to acquire players that help you right now. You just deal with the consequences later when they pop up. And so it just seems odd that they wouldn't really go hit what was their biggest area of concern heading into the season. So I guess if we get through the season and again we look and we're like, boy, goaltending again, then it's like, well, Rob Blake knew that was a problem going into the season, and he still really didn't do anything about
it. We saw last year, right? They fired the coach because that's usually the first lever, right? Is you fire the coach in your self-preservation. What do you think the Kings have to do for Rob Blake to like keep his job? Is it they have to get out of the first round? Like, what is it that this team has to do, or they just kind of? Man, that sucks. We lost again to Edmonton or whomever they play, Colorado or Vancouver or whoever they play. Is it just like is it just kind of status quo or whatever? I'm super curious how long the leash is for Rob Blake, who has been there for a while. Is he going to? Are they going to make a change to try to find something? But then again, when the new GM comes in, it's not like they have a bunch of flexibility, right? You've got a lot of these guys signed for multiple seasons, and it's like, I know Drew Doughty is going to be signed for the next 3 years at $11 million. Kopitar's got the next 2 seasons at $7 million. And some of these other guys are signed for 3-4+ years. Like, what's the new GM gonna do to try to fix this roster?
I think Rob Blake at least buys himself some time if he is able to get out of the first round, because the last 3 seasons the Kings did not make the playoffs in 2020, 2021. They have every season since, but they've been bounced in 7 games. They've been bounced in 6 games. They've been bounced in 5 games. So
sweep coming.
you're going in the wrong direction. And so I think at minimum, because you can't even necessarily say like take a series in the first round to the brink, and if you come up short, then you're like, yeah, okay, that's. I feel like they got to win a series for him to keep his job. Otherwise, you're the loss. Like, it would be one thing if you were a team in the middle of the country, but the fact that you're Los Angeles Kings playing in a major market, like, that just ups the expectations regardless. And so
Yeah.
if they don't get out of the first round, I think Rob Blake is gone.
Yeah, I mean, it's, again, like you said, you can't have 4 years in a row. What are you, the Minnesota Wild, losing 4 years in a row in the in the first round of the playoffs? Yeah, I think Rob Blake. I think it's a big year for Rob Blake. I'm curious to see if he is potentially a guy who knows he's like got nothing to live for. Like, if how aggressive he is at the trade deadline and spending future assets to try to improve this team now, especially if he knows I might not be here next season. So.
Yeah, time will tell, but don't be surprised if we get to the end of the season and we're talking about the goaltending again for the Los Angeles Kings, like we have been for the last 1,300 years. I don't know.
Since Jonathan Quick, since that tweet went out, the Jonathan Quick tweet.
Simpler times. We used to be a decent society, hoping for good goaltending from the Los Angeles Kings, but here we are. Speaking of a team that has not had postseason success for the last several seasons, the Minnesota Wild, they have an interesting fight on their hands this season that we will talk about as we continue today's episode of Locked On NHL. We'll also talk about the Nashville Predators, the big winners of the offseason. We'll get to their burning questions as well. That's all on the way after this. Today's episode of Locked On NHL is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we got something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Looking for something to throw $5 on? My general rule of thumb has been the Chicago White Sox, although they're playing much better as of late. So maybe that's not the option you're looking for. Since it's NFL season, have no fear, the New York Giants are here. And so if you're looking for a team that is a guaranteed winner, and the best part about this is you don't even need to win your bets. It's just you throw $5 down on whoever the Giants are playing to cover, and you then have the option for a free 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket. But don't delay. This deal is only good through September 22nd. Visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook today. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On NHL. Once again, we are your team each and every day, and we thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. For your second listen, make sure to check out Locked On NHL Prospects, as we'll be getting prospect rankings here between now and the start of the regular season, seeing which teams top the list and which prospects stand out the most. I have a feeling both of these teams are probably going to be pretty high on the list, but I guess we'll wait and see which team ends up higher in the rankings. That's Locked On NHL Prospects. Make sure to check them out and subscribe on your favorite podcast platforms. All right, as many frequently say when the time comes to spotlight the team that they cover, my turn. The Minnesota Wild.
Clear out. I'm gonna stand in the corner.
Go grab a snack. Go fill up your water. The Minnesota Wild, coming into the season, have an interesting dynamic on their hands because you have a pretty veteran-laden roster of players that have, with some pretty substantial cap constraints, have shown the ability to be a playoff caliber team over the last couple of seasons. We're now in the final of those major cap hurdles, the final season of those major cap hurdles. And as we just alluded to in hyping up Locked On NHL prospects, the Minnesota Wild have a pretty substantial prospect pool at their disposal as well. And so we're getting over this year and next year, we're going to get this interesting kind of power struggle because general manager Bill Guerin has been pretty protective of his guys and this core that he has put together over the last couple of seasons. But he dropped an interesting nugget at the end of the season last year and saying some of these vets better up their performance. And if they don't, we've got the young players in the system to be able to push them for jobs. And so, burning question for the Minnesota Wild is, at what point do we see some of that transfer of from the experience, from the more veteran players to the youth? Because, you can rely on veteran players to a certain point, but at some point, the younger players offer you more and give you the better chance to win by what they bring to the table from a skill, from a speed, from a scoring perspective, over some of those guys that maybe don't have as high of a ceiling, but don't have as low of a floor. You've got guys like Marcus Johansson, Freddie Gaudreau. Those are the two main ones, but players like Liam Ogren, Danila Yurov a year from now, Riley Height rising the prospect ranks as well. You have these guys that are knocking on the door right now. And if the Wild get off to a slow start this year, or if particular players do, like here's what a scenario that I envision. Let's say the Wild get off to a decent start this year, but have spots in the lineup that are in clear need of an upgrade. How long do you give the benefit of the doubt to those guys before you say, hey, it's time to just see what we've got with these young guys and see if they can help us get to where we need to go? This is something that I'm sure you've seen plenty of with the Sharks over the last couple of seasons. And it feels like the Wild are getting closer and closer to the point where they just have to say, we got to give these guys a chance. And that's, I think, going to be the huge overarching theme of the season this year. I just wonder how many games it takes to where we start to see some of that. Or if these guys light it up in the preseason, do we see it before the season even starts?
That's always right. Sharks fans have always had, like Daniel Gushin, for example, last year, I think he scored a hat trick in the final preseason game and then doesn't make the opening night roster. And everyone's like, why is Daniel? There's always, the NHL preseason are like just two separate games, especially because like all the young players and stuff. But I think for the Wild, it is, you wonder if they maybe look south and see how the Dallas Stars did it, where it's almost like they kind of one guy at a time kind of took their turns to kind of bring these young guys in. You had Wyatt Johnson, who was kind of the leading the way, and then you had Logan Stankoven last year, and it seems like Maverick Bourque is going to be kind of their next guy. And are they kind of slow and make sure they putting these guys in proper positions to succeed by putting them around experienced guys? Or are they just going to kind of let these young guys just kind of take some jobs? I'm really curious to see what their approach is with that. And it's curious that, Bill Guerin's been very protective of this core that, like, honestly hasn't really done that much other than, like, there's some guys you can point to, like Kirill Kaprizov, like he's amazing. Like everybody would want Kaprizov on your team, right? Like he's a genuine superstar. But like a lot of these other guys, it's like, yeah, they're nice players, but are they maybe a little kind of maybe punching a little bit above their weight? Like if they're on a championship caliber team, are they maybe kind of down the lineup a little bit, et cetera, et cetera. And, you wonder like how long until some of these young guys break through. Kind of you look at Carolina, right? This is this one of those teams that's very competitive, but also has a really insane prospect pool. They're running into a problem where like they can't get their prospects playing because they just have too many good players. I think I don't think the Wild's roster is anywhere as good as Carolina's roster. I don't think that's a stretch to say here, but I am curious of how they go about kind of working these young guys in. How much of a leash do they give these young guys when they do start to come in? And how much they bounce around? And you look at like Matt Boldy, who I think a couple years ago was kind of bouncing around between the AHL and the NHL. And he was too good to play in the AHL because I watched him just dominate the Barracuda for a weekend series. But then he just needed reps in the NHL. But then now look at him; he's earned himself a nice contract and looks to be a really awesome player going forward. You wonder if it's just like we already know this year is if it's gonna just be a better to take a step back season, especially with so much cap tied up to dead money. Let these young guys play, kind of get through their rookie, bumps and bruises. And then you go into next year when you have a bunch more cap space, and then with young guys who have confidence, and kind of go from there and see if you can start to shed some of these older veterans to teams who maybe want to add to some experience heading into the playoffs, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I'm really curious to see what the Wild do and if they can try to manage and navigate the retool instead of having to go through the full rebuild.
Yeah, well, and they really can't afford to do full rebuild because you've got Kirill Kaprizov's extension looming. He's not going to want to stick around for that. So it is rebuild on the fly, retool on the fly. But I think we are rapidly reaching the point in which we see some of these lineup swaps happen. Because, look, if guys like Marcus Johansson and Freddie Gaudreau play up to the level they're capable of, okay, they're pulling their weight. And so that makes the conversation, that calms the conversation down a little bit. But if these guys come out this coming season and struggle, or just don't really give you what you need in particular spots, that's when those rumblings start to get louder. And you as a GM who has endured, a pretty mediocre season this past year, fired your coach, all of a sudden now you're starting to maybe feel your seat get a little warm. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out, because I think a lot of Wild fans just would like to see some of the youth, because it's one thing to lose with a young lineup that is showing strides, just trying to kind of put it all together. It's another thing to have a group that just looks like they aren't capable of playing with any team that is a playoff contender. And you're like, well, this is the best we can do. And it's not good enough. It's like, then what do you do?
Yep.
So time will tell. And to be honest, if the Wilds don't perform well against the teams like Colorado, Winnipeg, Nashville, Dallas, they're not going to be in a postseason spot next year anyway. One team that does expect to be in a postseason spot, the Nashville Predators, the darlings of the offseason. Do they have enough to get to where they want to go? We'll finish today's episode of Locked On NHL talking about that very subject after this. One final segment of today's episode of Locked On NHL. Once again, we are your team each and every day, and we thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. All right, JD, Nashville Predators, they signed everybody in free agency. Barry Trotz went after serial winners. in the offseason and has assembled himself a pretty nice roster. But I wonder, and you wonder as well,
We wonder.
it's a roster that has very good top end talent.
Yes.
But like a turtle, if you flip it over, is there a soft underbelly that can be exploited? Like where are we at with the depth of this Predators team?
Yeah, I think that is the big question because, I mean, like you said, this team went out and they added big pieces this offseason, right? Steven Stamkos, Jonathan Marchessault, Brady Shea. Like those guys are like upper crust type players, and those guys have all, other than Brady Shea, those guys have all won something in this league. You have UC Saros, like you made your decision, right? We're paying UC Saros, like he's our dude for the next 8 years. Like these are like this team is as much as it feels very much all in. But like you look at how other teams have won in the past, and it's usually that middle six, especially that third line, where you have guys who are probably second line players on other teams playing on your third line. And the depth right now for Nashville does worry me, and they are very close to the cap. I think they've got $1.5 million right now. They still have RFAs that are outstanding. They have a ton of picks. They've got 3 picks in the first round. Like, how does Barry Trotz, I think, try to navigate to add depth to this team? Because if Stamkos gets hurt, right? Stamkos has not been the healthiest guy in the world. Like, if some of these guys kind of get nicks and bruises from a full season, and it's a veteran team. Ryan O'Reilly, 33, Stamkos, 34, Philip Forsberg, 30, Marchessault, 33, Goose Nyquist, 35. Like, these are older guys. Like, what happens when these guys have to miss a couple games for this and that and the other? And then your shiny new car, like, it looks great, but it just doesn't have all the safety precautions, safety measures to kind of get you through a full season.
The top 6 is great. Like
Yes.
Forsberg, Stamkos, Marchessault, O'Reilly, Novak, Nyquist. That is stapled in as your top 6. Choose your matchups accordingly.
Yeah.
But beyond that, like your bottom 6 guys that are currently on the roster is going to be some combination of Colton Sissons, Cole Smith, Michael McCarron, Mark Jankowski, Luke Evangelista, Juuso Parssinen, and Philip Tomasino, who you mentioned as the RFA that is yet to sign. You hit it right on the head, because teams like, you go up against a team like the Dallas Stars, and they have scoring up and down the lineup. Who are you throwing at a third line that includes the likes of, probably going to be Logan Stankoven, because I would imagine Wyatt Johnston gets elevated in the lineup, but Logan Stankoven's still pretty darn good as a third line player. Who are you throwing to contend with those guys? And you mentioned the potential for some bumps and bruises in this lineup. It's a lot of guys that have missed time over the last few seasons. Like Marchessault has missed time. Stamkos has been
anything with Vegas for missing time. I'm willing to kind of look the other way,
it's a little sketch.
A week and a nod. Yeah,
it's a little sketch.
Yeah.
Gustav Nyquist was relatively healthy this past season, but he did miss a big chunk of the year the previous year. Who's going to jump up in the lineup if Marchessault or Ryan O'Reilly, somebody that's missed time over the last few seasons? Like, if those guys get knocked out of the lineup, who are you bumping up to fill those spots? Like, it's very much a team that it feels like, if the top 6 and if the top 4 and if the top 4 on D and if UC Saros all avoid major injury, they're fine. But if not, then you have some question. You have some big potential problems that arise, because we talk about the offense, like defensively, Roman Josi, Brady Shea, Alexander Carrier, and Luke Shen. It's a pretty solid top four. And it's not to take anything away from Dante Fabro and Jeremy Lauzon. But those are your top six. If somebody gets hurt there, you're throwing a youngster in Spencer Stastny, most likely. Like, it feels like a team that's going to have to make a trade at the deadline to add some depth for the playoff push, because all these teams that they're going to go against in the Central, bigger bodies, tends to play physical, but also have the speed and skill elements. I think of Winnipeg. I think of Dallas. Heavier teams that are going to be more physical when you play them. Also, don't count the Minnesota Wild out in that department, even if they're not a playoff team. Like,
I was going to say St. Louis, we know is they love to play physical brand of hockey too, and they have plenty of. I know the defense core is as old as dirt, but those guys can still play some heavy hockey, and they have plenty of speed in their forward group too. Yeah, this Central is not a joke. Like, there's no joke. In this Central, so you wonder if Nashville, if they can make it through a full 82 game season, or if it's just one of those teams like, just get us to the playoffs, like, very much, we'll just get us to the playoffs, get us healthy, and then let's figure we'll be able to figure things out there. So I'm curious. They are a team that, like, they wouldn't surprise me if they're the best team in the Western Conference, or if they're one of those teams that's like limping into the playoffs.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how the playoff picture plays out, especially in the West. Like, we let everybody over on the Wednesday show talk about the Eastern Conference. We're very Western centric, so we'll see how it plays out, and we of course will keep you covered every step of the way. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Locked On NHL. Once again, hit that like button if you're watching on YouTube before you head out for the day, and make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We have new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.